House Majority Leader, the Honorable Steny Hoyer and Mrs. Yvette Lewis. Staff Representative Kate Knudsen, accompanying Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi and Mr. Paul Pelosi. Staff Representative Lindsey Kerr, accompanying the Honorable Amy Klobuchar and Mr. John Bessler. Staff Representative Stephanie Hager-Mucko, accompanying Senate Majority Leader, the Honorable Mitch McConnell and the Honorable Elaine L. Chao. And Staff Representative Rochelle Graves Schroeder, accompanying the Chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the Honorable Roy Blunt and Mrs. Abigail Blunt.
So those members of the JCEC, the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the official host of today's 59th inaugural ceremonies, we can see them there headed out onto the platform. The announcer just said the names.
Proud moment for the committee.
They've put all this together.
Not just September, well before that, the planning has gone on. And let's be honest, this has been a different inauguration and hopefully something that we won't see again. For a lot of different reasons, and they've really pulled this off handsomely. There goes Senator Blunt, the former Majority Whip of the House. He's been through a few of these ceremonies. Again, this is the second time he has chaired this committee.
Yes.
There's been 5 people to chair the committee twice, and Senator Blunt would be the latest.
He spoke of this ceremony today being an assurance for all people, our continued and unbroken commitment, continuity, stability, perseverance, democracy. As we get ready to see the peaceful transfer of power, an event both commonplace and miraculous. President-elect Biden here and Dr. Jill Biden just passing through the crypt of the Capitol, soon to emerge onto the platform. We can see the back of the Obamas here on the platform. Cole and Ella, and it's snowing. Cole and Ella, VP Harris's children there. Ella is the young lady you see with the plaid coat with kind of an embellishment on the shoulders.
Ladies and gentlemen, accompanying the President-elect, the Staff Director of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, Fitzhugh Elder IV, the Acting House Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Tim Blodgett, and the Acting Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Jennifer Hemingway.
You know, snow, not unheard of in Washington in January. But you know what? When they used to have these in March, snow was also not unheard of.
Not at all.
Until 1933, inaugurations happened in March, and pretty risky in the era before paved roads.
Well, our last inauguration, it was, we had a little bit of rain, President Trump. On our last inauguration, of course, President Obama, I think it was about 25 degrees.
The weather's always an element.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden.
This piece by the Marine Band Trio from Hail America. Known as the President's Own. They play at the pleasure of the President and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And they've played at every inauguration since Jefferson's. Biden's approaching their seats on the platform here. Greeting former VP Dan Quayle.
Look at his eyes.
The pride.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
That's a phrase that is well welcomed right now. Let's enjoy the ceremony.
Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice Vice President Pence, Mr. President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to this stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does: goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible, my friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda till I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the inauguration as we officially begin the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank the Joint Committee staff and our partners, particularly our security partners, for the way they've dealt with unprecedented circumstances. When I chaired the inauguration 4 years ago, I shared President Reagan's 1981 description of this event as commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Miraculous because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Americans have celebrated this moment during war, during depression, and now during pandemic. Once again, all three branches of our government come together as the Constitution envisions. Once again, we renew our commitment to our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union. That theme for this inauguration, our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union, was announced by the Joint Committee before the election with the belief that the United States can only fulfill its promise and set an example for others if we are always working to be better than we have been. The Constitution established that determined democracy with its first three words, declaring the people as the source of the government. The Articles of Confederation hadn't done that. The Magna Carta hadn't done that. Only the Constitution says the government exists because the people are the source of the reason it exists. They immediately followed those first three words with the words to form a more perfect union. The founders did not say to form a perfect union. They did not claim that in our new country nothing would need to be improved. Fortunately, they understood that always working to be better would be the hallmark of a great democracy. The nation we have today is not here just because it happened, and they aren't complete. A great democracy working through the successes and failures of our history, striving to be better than it had been. And we are more than we have been, and we are less than we hope to be. The assault on our Capitol at this very place just 2 weeks ago reminds us that a government designed to balance and check itself is both fragile and resilient. During the last year, the pandemic challenged our free and open society and called for extraordinary determination and sacrifice, and still challenges us today. Meeting that challenge head on have been and are healthcare workers, scientists, first responders, essential frontline workers, and so many others we depend on in so many ways. Today we come to this moment, people all over the world, as we're here, are watching and will watch what we do here. Our government comes together. The Congress and the courts join the transition of executive responsibility. One political party more pleased today and on every inaugural day than the other. But this is not a moment of division, it's a moment of unification. A new administration begins and brings with it a new beginning. And with that, our great national debate goes forward, and a determined democracy will continue to be essential in pursuit of a more perfect union and a better future for all Americans. What a privilege for me to join you today. Thank you. I'm pleased to call to the podium a longtime friend of the President-elect and his family, Father Leo O'Donovan, to lead us in an invocation. Please stand if you are able and remain standing for the national anthem and the pledge to our flag.
Gracious and merciful God, at this sacred time we come before you in need, indeed on our knees. But we come still more with hope and with our eyes raised anew to the vision of a more perfect union in our land, a union of all our citizens to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We are a people of many races, creeds, and colors, national backgrounds, cultures, and styles, now far more numerous and on land much vaster than when Archbishop John Carroll wrote his prayer for the inauguration of George Washington 232 years ago. Archbishop Carroll prayed that you, O Creator of all, would assist with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude the President of these United States, that his administration may be conducted in righteousness and be eminently useful to your people. Today we confess our past failures according to our vision of equality, inclusion, and freedom for all. Yet we resolutely commit still more now to renewing the vision, to caring for one another in word and deed, especially the least fortunate among us, and so becoming a light for the world. There is a power in each and every one of us that lives by turning to every other one of us, a thrust of the Spirit to cherish and care and stand by others, and above all, those most in need. It is called love, and its path is to give ever more of itself. Today, it is called American patriotism, born not of power and privilege, but of care for the common good, with malice toward none and with charity for all. For our new president, we beg of you the wisdom Solomon sought when he knelt before you and prayed for an understanding heart so that I can govern your people and know the difference between right and wrong. We trust in the counsel of the letter of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. By ourselves, he wrote, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Be with us, holy mystery of love, as we dream together. Help us under our new president to reconcile the people of our land, restore our dream and invest it with peace and justice and the joy that is the overflow of love. To the glory of your name, forever, amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of our national colors by the Armed Forces Color Guard, the singing of our national anthem, and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ladies and gentlemen, here for the singing of our national anthem, accompanied by the President's own United States Marine Band, please welcome Lady Gaga. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the City of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall, for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman Vice President, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's Own United States Marine Band.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking down that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley.
Well, that was great. The sun is shining, and Mr. President-elect, this is the first inauguration in the history of America where J-Lo was the warm-up act for Chief Justice Roberts. With that, it is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, to administer the presidential oath to the next President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr.
Thank
President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all of those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis. America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through, America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Hard not to be reminded of President Obama's singing that same song at the Mother Emanuel Church. a song that in our culture is as close to both poetry and prayer as you could possibly come. And we're going to finish with those two things. Let me introduce Amanda Gorman, our nation's first ever National Poet Laureate.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Thank you, Amanda Gorman. Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware, a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
As a nation and people of faith gathered in this historical moment, let us unite in prayer. God, we gather under the beauty of your holiness and the holiness of your beauty. We seek your face, your smile, your warm embrace. We petition you once more in this celebration. We pray for divine favor upon our President, Joseph R. Biden, and our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and their family. We further ask that you would extend the same favor upon our Vice President, Kamala D. Harris, and our Second Gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and their family. More than ever, they and our nation need you. We need you, for in you we discover our common humanity. In our common humanity, we will seek out the wounded and bind their wounds. We will seek healing for those who are sick and diseased. We will mourn our dead. We will befriend the lonely, the least, and the left out. We will share our abundance with those who are hungry. We will do justly to the oppressed, acknowledge sin, and seek forgiveness, thus grasping reconciliation. In discovering our humanity, we will seek the good in and for all our neighbors. We will love the unlovable, remove the stigma of the so-called untouchables. We will care for our most vulnerable, our children, the elderly, emotionally challenged, and the poor. We will seek rehabilitation beyond correction. We will extend opportunity to those locked out of opportunity. We will make friends of our enemies. We will make friends of our enemies. People, your people, shall no longer raise up weapons against one another. We will rather use our resources for the national good and become a beacon of life and goodwill to the world. And neither shall we learn hatred anymore. We will lie down in peace and not make our neighbors afraid. In you, O God, we discover our humanity. In our humanity, we discover our commonness. Beyond the difference of color, creed, origin, political party, ideology, geography, and personal preferences. We'll become greater stewards of your environment, preserving the land, reaping from it a sustainable harvest, and securing its wonder and miracle-giving power for generations to come. This is our benediction, that from these hallowed grounds, where slaves labored to build this shrine and citadel to liberty and democracy, let us all acknowledge, from the indigenous Native American to those who recently received their citizenship, from the African American to those whose foreparents came from Europe and every corner of the globe, from the wealthy to those struggling to make it, from every human being, regardless of their choices, that this is our country. As such, teach us, O God. As such, teach us, O God, to live in it, love in it, be healed in it, and reconcile to one another in it, lest we miss kingdom's goal. To your glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. In the strong name of our collective faith, amen.
Please remain standing as the Armed Forces Color Guard retires our national colors. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated and remain in your seats while the President and official party depart the platform. For safety reasons, your ushers will release your section in an organized manner, following the playing of our national march, The Stars and Stripes Forever.
Thank you all. A lot of work for you. Thank you.
Well, Janet, we really witnessed something today. What did we witness? Janet, we really witnessed something today. What did we witness? Secession, orderly, disciplined. Orderly, disciplined secession. I'd like to make a couple of remarks in terms of Abraham Lincoln. He was quoted 3 times, now not by necessarily President Biden, but from the time the ceremony started. And 2 of the quotes were coming from his inauguration. How about the first youth poet, Amanda Gorham? She was tremendous, using words like rebuild and recovery. But she's awfully skilled in alliteration.
Yes, Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, an uplifting moment. Poets have been included in the ceremony since 1961. We were talking a little bit earlier, Robert Frost that year for Kennedy's inauguration read a poem, and it's one of these ways in which this tradition is expanding and contracting, right? There are different things each year, and there are some things that are the same from one to the next, but one constant is the peaceful transfer of power.
You know, at times during inaugural ceremonies, you can see things that look regal, and then you have something that was just so common and it just fit. Garth Brooks walking down the staircase and singing Amazing Grace, and when he left, it's as if his horse was hitched on the east side of the Capitol and he rode off. It was just wonderful.
You know, the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, Chairman Blunt said, we're witnessing an event both commonplace and miraculous. And I think you just summed it up right there. The commonality that we feel when we see musical performances, when we hear live music, and then this miraculous moment where we see this changeover of power. And it's something which is unique to the United States, this ceremony. Nobody else does anything like this. And nobody else has a live stream feed like ours, because we have cameras in places.
Even now.
We have cameras in places nobody else does. So we're getting some angles here. You can see the Obamas there.
Secretary Chow behind Mrs. Obama, Senator McConnell's wife.
That's VP Harris's children just behind them. Cole and Ella. Ella has the decorated shoulders on her jacket. There's Clinton, former President Clinton with the Obamas there as well. And this is the part where everybody gets up and starts to make their way back off the platform, back into the Capitol. We saw VP Harris and her husband going through the crypt a few moments ago.
You know, President Biden, within the first sentence or two, used these 3 words: our determined democracy.
That's
I thought
the
that was
theme.
pointed, yes.
That's the theme of this 59th inaugural ceremonies. That's the theme that the JSEC selected, and a wonderful phrase to encapsulate this: our determined democracy forging a more perfect union. And a few people made reference to it. You also mentioned how Biden's inaugural speech, he quoted others. And there's so many famous quotes that come to us from presidential inaugural speeches.
That's why inaugurations are so important. I mentioned earlier about Thomas Jefferson's quote. What about Andrew Jackson mentioning about government, that it should be for the good of the people, and that the people will direct, and that government should respect the privacy of persons and position. Andrew Jackson. We could go on about
FDR. The
Yes.
only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And Lincoln, the better angels of our nature, comes from one of his inaugural speeches. This is a moment where, and they vary in length. We've had long inaugural speeches in our nation's history. We've had short ones. We've had fatally long inaugural speeches.
Poor President Harrison, you had to bring that up. President Reagan mentioning, hey, it's not the people that have failed government. It's government that needs to be accountable to the people. And we see President Obama there, who was in his inaugural address, his first one, the remaking of America.
There's the poet Amanda Gorman there at the lower right of your screen. And President Obama hugging Lady Gaga.
The lady, what a tremendous rendition of the national anthem.
An incredible performance.
I'm not sure if that was a designer of a dress or an architect that built that dress. That is.
She's certainly found something to rival the architecture and the iconography of the Capitol. And I mean, we've talked a little bit about fashion choices, how to stand out in the crowd.
Now, you mentioned
There we are, the young poet, Amanda Gorman, shaking hands with former President Clinton.
Now, you just mentioned Miss Gorman, who has a speech impediment. And Janet, who else has a speech impediment?
President Biden.
How about Maya Angelou?
Maya Angelou, another poet who has spoken. So that's the poet Amanda Gorman in a yellow jacket, and we see Lady Gaga and Michelle Obama hugging here.
Well, there'll be a few pictures taken there. Oh,
we're
looking back to the East Front.
East Front steps.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's not over. What do we mean by it's the departure of Mr. Pence?
There's just as many iconic ceremonies that happen after the swearing of the oath as there are before. And there are just as many moments for us to watch and see these behind-the-scenes perspectives. I believe that's Hillary Clinton there, with the purple scarf.
No, I've just been someone that at times when we finished our assignments, which casually worked my way to the East Front, and there's hundreds, if there's more than a few thousand people for the departure ceremony. There's prayer that's rendered. There's pomp and circumstance. It's ceremonial.
Well, again, we talked a little bit earlier about how where is the president inaugurated versus where is the president not inaugurated. And this happens here at the Capitol,
Yes.
the home of the legislative branch, the home of Congress. And then so this departure ceremony, this moment where our new president and vice president depart from the Capitol and into their term, really is a historic moment, and it's a crucial part of this ceremony. Now, one thing that's different this year is that traditionally there is an inaugural luncheon that's held shortly after taking of the oaths.
In the old House chamber known as Statuary Hall, well, as you said, this year because of the pandemic, we're not having it.
That's the poet Amanda Gorman there in the yellow jacket again. And a beautiful view of the dome here on the west front of the Capitol. Again, those flags there representing the center one is our current flag, 50 stars for 50 states. The ones at the far ends for the 13 colonies that were in the Union in the beginning.
Friends, we have a video clip for you right now.
When applicable, following the swearing-in ceremonies on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, the outgoing president and first lady leave the Capitol to begin their post-presidential lives. Traditionally, the president's departure takes place with little ceremony. In 1797, George Washington attended the inauguration of his successor, John Adams. With few exceptions, subsequent departing presidents followed Washington's example. Until the early 20th century, the departing president also usually accompanied the newly elected president on the carriage ride from the Capitol to the White House following the inauguration. In the early 20th century, a new tradition evolved whereby the outgoing president quietly left the Capitol immediately following the swearing-in ceremony. In 1909, after congratulating President Howard Taft, former President Theodore Roosevelt left the Capitol for Union Station, where he took a train to his home in New York. Outgoing Presidents Coolidge and Hoover also left the Capitol for Union Station, where they traveled home by train. Outgoing Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Johnson left the Capitol by car. In recent years, the newly installed president and vice president have escorted their predecessors out of the Capitol after the swearing-in ceremony. The members of the JSIC gather on the stairs on the east front of the Capitol building and watch as the new vice president escorts the outgoing vice president and his spouse out of the Capitol through a military cordon. Then, the new president escorts the outgoing president and his spouse through the military cordon. Since Gerald Ford's departure in 1977, the former president and first lady have left the Capitol grounds by helicopter, weather permitting.
We have these wonderful videos detailing some of the traditions behind our inauguration that we get to show you. And here we are preparing to see the departure going down the east front of the Capitol steps. The members of the Joint Committee are going to line up, and you can see VP Harris there in the purple getting ready. They're getting ready to head out the east doors, the rotunda behind them in this shot, and going down through the military cordon and out to the waiting cars.
Have we noticed that the weather conditions have improved dramatically?
Well, we've had some weather changes today. I take back everything I said in the first hour of the broadcast about the nice 40-degree day that we had. We had some snow flurries in there, then the sun came out. We're really being taken for a ride today. You know, there were blizzard conditions for William Howard Taft's inauguration. They had to hold that one inside as well.
Notice who was the lead person out the east front. Eugene Goodman.
United States Capitol Police Officer Eugene O. Goodman there. He was the gentleman that you saw in the light-colored coat, acting Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, acting Deputy Senate Sergeant-at-Arms for the day. Here we go. The Harrises and the Pences walking down the steps, or, excuse me, Mr. Emhoff and Ms. Harris going down the steps here. The east front steps going through the military cordon and taking a moment on the east front steps together.
This has to be a pointed moment for particularly the Pences. We don't know what the future holds for them, but
you know, Al Gore was my college graduation speaker, and he said the moment that it took hold for him, that it was over, was when he walked away after this moment, and the Secret Service wasn't there, the car was, everything was different right at this moment, and that's when he realized really what the changeover was. He referenced that in his speech at my graduation.
You know, something that is going on right now that we can't see, the staff, meaning the outgoing staff, I'm sure are just probably in tears right now. I've seen that at a distance, and just knowing that this is final.
I mean, I think we'd be
closure.
Hard-pressed to think of anyone for whom this is not an emotional day. Not just the people who are directly involved in the administration, but the folks who work here at the Capitol who witness these every couple of years like we do, and the folks watching at home have got to have emotions bound up in these moments. And especially when you feel empathy for the various people and think of the emotions that are going through those heads. That's usually where it gets me. So we can see former VP Pence getting into the car here on the east front, taking a last look at the Capitol and a wave to the staff and the military cordon, and the JCIC, the Joint Congressional Committee on Inauguration Ceremonies.
In time, we will have on the east front the passing of the review, passing the review.
We'll see the pass and review here on the east front in coming up in a little bit. We'll see them standing there and watching, reviewing all of the troops going by.
Now, I was not assigned to the Old Guard. I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I've been in a lot of processions and reviews. And it feels like, for example, let's say President Biden is physically looking at everyone there. It's not the case, but as someone that has served, you feel that way.
Well, we were talking earlier about members of Congress, you know, making appearances on our tours and acknowledging the members of the public, folks from all over the country and people from all over the world that are visiting us. But the members of Congress, the senators, also frequently acknowledge us when we're in positions of support like this. Representative John Lewis always took the time to stop, recognize us, because one of the things that we do in addition to providing tours is to provide support for congressional events. And this, obviously, this is the granddaddy of congressional events for the year. Other times we're there for, like for Representative Lewis memorial service this past summer, but also congressional gold medal ceremonies. Great view of the east front here.
Yes, you mentioned Mr. Lewis, that on those very steps where Vice President Harris and her husband are ascending now was this casket.
Yes, right where
this is all within the last year.
Standing just this past summer, just about 6 months ago or so. That is where Congressman Lewis's casket was. And actually, Speaker Pelosi is standing in almost the exact same position the cameras captured her on that evening. And you can see the JCIC there as well. So members of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugurations, on inaugural ceremonies, they...
Excellent camera shot here. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, it's fabulous. Look, we can see everybody here.
Yes.
So just a reminder for the folks at home, Steny Hoyer there in the red scarf, the Speaker of the House in the teal coat that we see there, and that's Senator Blunt with her. He is the chair of this Joint Congressional Committee that is the official host of inaugurations and the host of our live stream today. And here they are all coming back in through the east front door, making this turn. And then there are a few things that need to happen before we have some gift presentations coming up a little bit later on. That would normally happen during the inaugural luncheon.
Day is far from done. We have President Biden that has some ceremony signings in the president's room that President Washington thought of. To think back in 1780s that President Washington thought, let's have a president's room. It took until the 1850s for them to complete it.
Looking at the east front of the Capitol, when you see it from a shot like this, we think of them as the new House and Senate, but of course, they're not that new.
No.
The new House and Senate chambers are at the far ends of the building. It's called a hyphen, the way that they're connected off the end there. So those are actually cropped out in this view of the east front that we see here. So what you're looking at, if you can imagine, instead of that huge white painted cast iron dome, if you can imagine a shorter one, wood with a copper roof, and that copper roof, turning green over time. That's an idea of what the Capitol looked like back when not Jefferson was inaugurated, back when Monroe was inaugurated, let's say.
Ceremony unit, you can.
All right, we've got another video coming up, and we have these great videos that are taking you through.
First official actions taken by the newly sworn President of the United States occur in the President's room just off the Senate chamber in the U.S. Capitol. After the departure of the former President and First Lady, the new President gathers there with aides and members of Congress to sign nominations and sometimes memorandums, proclamations, or executive orders. This tradition began in 1981 with President Ronald Reagan. Prior to that time, nominations were often submitted to the Senate on Inauguration Day without ceremony.
All right, I think members of the military cordon here, bayonets affixed. Heading back into the Capitol, you can see a fleet of cars there transporting all these folks. Of course, the ones with the flags on the front there, most likely vice presidential vehicles.
The area that they're going towards is the Law Library. And then in that area is where Thomas Jefferson was first inaugurated, March 4th, 1801. And his second inauguration was in that room.
Yeah, right there on the first floor of the Senate side. It's part of the oldest section of the building.
Jen, I hope the people can see this pediment that's in this triangle, and it's Genius of America, and it used to be sandstone.
About the triangular section above the door.
Used to be sandstone, and it deteriorated, and they changed it to marble from Tate, Georgia. And so, friends, there was a part of this porch, if you will, that was extended out about 32 feet just before President Kennedy was inaugurated to give balance to the dome. Now you see people around there. That's something that's in the past that was allowed by the general public. I'm talking about the 1940s, 30s. It was just overwhelmed with people, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have inaugurations on the east side anymore.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier there's a famous photo from Lincoln's inaugural where he's out here, and the crowd around him is so thick you can hardly pick out Lincoln except for his exceptional height. And in that photo with him actually is John Wilkes Booth, who attended Lincoln's inaugural that day and said, if I'd had my weapon, I could have had a shot at him. That's how close he was.
That would be the last speech he would make.
Now, speaking of Lincoln and the Civil War, flanking that door are figures of war and peace in those niches there on either side of the east front door. So again, the east front of the Capitol was the traditional front of the building. The Statue of Freedom on top faces this direction. Of course, you were just discussing the pediment, the sculpture that's there above the door. Of course, there's no part of the Capitol that's not ornate. And there is no back of the Capitol. There's an east front and there's a west front. And I think maybe we need to emphasize that today. So here, everything's happening on both fronts of the Capitol today. Here on the East Front, we saw arrivals coming in earlier. We've got departures, the pass and review coming up. And as for the actual swearing in, over on the West Front side.
All three branches of government. Oh,
this is shot inside the president's room,
the
folks.
press room. Friends, look at these beautiful floors. These are English Minton tiles from Stoke-upon-Trent in England. They're $2.03 per tile. And what you're seeing, I love this camera view, is President Washington's cabinet. It looks like Henry Knox, Secretary of War, in the corner there.
I don't know if I can emphasize enough how unique this opportunity is for us to see this. I worked at the Capitol now for 12 years, and I've seen the inside of this room maybe half a dozen times.
Ladies and gentlemen, stand by for a video on the signing ceremony. You want to see this.
The first official actions taken by the newly sworn President of the United States occur in the President's room just off the Senate chamber in the U.S. Capitol. After the departure of the former President and First Lady, the new President gathers there with aides and members of Congress to sign nominations and sometimes memorandums, proclamations, or executive orders. This tradition began in 1981 with President Ronald Reagan. Prior to that time, nominations were often submitted to the Senate on Inauguration Day without ceremony.
So the President's room is a really special room inside the Capitol, and we're actually not going to be able to show you the moments, some of the moments here, that we're recording them for posterity, but they're not necessarily going to be live because of the importance of what happens in this space.
You mentioned importance. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., along with President Lyndon Johnson. Janet, you mentioned the importance of this room. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. A little story with this. Quite a few years ago, there's a person that comes to me, and she wants to bring her daughter to see a video of the visitor center. And so she says, I just want to see that. I said, well, that's fine. And little did I know at that time when she left, and she says, I'm Lenny Bird. It's President Johnson's daughter who wants her granddaughter to see her father in the video. It was such a moving moment for me.
So we're coming up on the signing ceremony here today, folks, and we have some video about that.
While the tradition of an inaugural luncheon dates back as far as 1897, when the Senate Committee on Arrangements gave a luncheon for President McKinley and several other guests at the Capitol, it did not begin in its current form until 1953. That year, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, Mrs. Eisenhower, and 50 other guests of the JASIC dined on cream chicken, baked ham, and potato puffs in the now restored Old Senate Chamber. From the mid-19th century to the early 20th century, presidents left the Capitol after the swearing-in ceremonies and traveled to the White House for a luncheon prepared by the outgoing President and First Lady. In 1949, Secretary of the Senate Leslie Biffle hosted a small lunch for President Truman in his Capitol reception room. They dined on South Carolina turkey, Smithfield ham, potato salad, and pumpkin pie. In 1953, the JASIC began its current tradition of hosting a luncheon for the President, Vice President, and their spouses, Senate leaders, the JASIC members, and other invited guests. At the inaugural luncheon in 1981, newly sworn-in President Ronald Reagan announced the release of 52 American citizens who had been held hostage in Iran for 444 days. Traditionally, the luncheon often features cuisine reflecting the home states of the new president and vice president or the JASIC chairman, as well as the theme of the inauguration. The program includes speeches, gift presentations from the JASIC, and toasts to the new administration.
So this is the site of our broadcast today. This is the Russell Senate Office Building. And we discussed a little bit earlier how prior to the early 20th century, the members of Congress didn't have separate offices. They used their desks on the floor of the chambers, House and Senate, or they used their private homes to store correspondence, research, and all of the paperwork that they deal with legislation.
It took some time, but by 1909, we had a building that the senators work out of, and then it's renamed years later after Richard Russell from the state of Georgia. And we're located just outside of the beautiful Kennedy Caucus Room, named after John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Robert Francis Kennedy, and Edward Kennedy. Oh, look at our control room.
Yeah, the Kennedy Caucus Room, normally the site of many wonderful ceremonies, but today it is our Mission Control Center. You can see right there our wonderful team putting together this live stream broadcast today. We've got, as we mentioned, we have cameras in a lot of places that other folks don't, so you can see all of our camera feeds up on the screen there. And this is a huge and beautiful room.
It's so ornate.
It's in the style of Versailles.
Mm-hmm. Well, the windows are from France. Now, you could fit a tennis court and maybe half a basketball court here. I mentioned this earlier. There should be an opera performed here. But this is our control center, and we've had over 30 camera feeds throughout the building, throughout the campus, that's giving you this great coverage.
You might have heard a collective gasp from Ron and I earlier when we got that camera view inside the president's room, right? Where right now the president is being briefed, and then there'll also be in a few minutes a little bit of signing activity happening there. It is a beautiful and ornate room inside the Capitol. There really are no unornate spaces inside this Capitol complex, but these are among some of the most beautiful ones.
Our friends from Texas, I think, are making a departure.
One can go.
You know, this Kennedy Caucus Room has been the site of a few hearings.
Yeah, a few.
The Titanic.
Teapot Dome scandal.
Well, how about McCarthy hearings?
In 1937, this is where President Roosevelt's plan to pack the Supreme Court was discussed.
And Watergate hearings. So I don't think this room is not too unfamiliar for a lot of Americans.
Well, this might be something which is a point of interest to our audience at home, because they probably picture all of the action happening in the chambers.
No.
And really, the chambers are where the voting happens
Yes.
and a certain amount of debate, but caucus rooms like this, committee chambers, here we see the Clintons departing there on our screen. Caucus rooms like this, committee chambers, rooms all over the Capitol are where a lot of the action happens. And if you watch hearings on TV, you may notice that you're seeing different spaces than you see when you watch votes.
Here comes the Obamas.
We're watching these departures on the East Front as we're coming to you from a separate building over in the Russell Senate Office Building. You know, this building is made intentionally to be fireproof.
You know what's ironic, Janet? This building is so old, yet when they built the new buildings, such as the Hart Building, the members didn't want to go to the Technology Building. Everyone likes everything old. Think about this.
I mean,
where do they have inaugural luncheons for the president? Old. Statuary Hall, old House Chamber. Where were they before? Old Senate Chamber. No one likes anything new.
Yeah, we have a very long memory. I mentioned to you guys in the beginning that the guide service has been part of the story here on Capitol Hill, part of the community since 1876. So when Ron and I talk about old versus new, we really mean that in like a much further reach. If you can imagine, this new Hart Senate Office Building he's talking about, it's a little bit older than me, I think. And we talk about the new House Chamber, the new Senate Chamber. Those are from the late 1850s.
The new House Chamber received criticism because of artificial air, artificial light. I mean, amazing.
Now, the old House Chamber we now call National Statuary Hall. That video that we just watched about inaugural lunches showed a lot of photographs that happened there in National Statuary Hall, where that luncheon is traditionally held, and it's the former House Chamber. And actually, it's the way the building functions architecturally, it's pretty much a pass-through. It's directly on the route between the rotunda, the Speaker's office, and the House floor.
Janet, let's go to another video, please.
on March 4, 1793, Washington gave the shortest inaugural address on record, just 135 words. Every president since Washington has delivered an inaugural address. While many of the early presidents read their addresses before taking the oath, current custom dictates that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court administer the oath first, followed by the president's speech. William Henry Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address at 8,445 words on March 4, 1841. John Adams' inaugural address, which totaled 2,308 words, contained the longest sentence at 737 words. In 1921, Warren G. Harding became the first president to take his oath and deliver his inaugural address through loudspeakers. In 1925, Calvin Coolidge's inaugural address was the first to be broadcast nationally by radio. And in 1949, Harry S. Truman became the first president to deliver his inaugural address over television airwaves. Most presidents use their inaugural address to present their vision of America and to set forth their goals for the nation. Some of the most eloquent and powerful speeches are still quoted today. In 1865, in the waning days of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln stated, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt avowed, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And in 1961, John F. Kennedy declared, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country."
Not only does this JSEC live stream have cameras in places no one else does to give us behind the scenes views, we also have cameras placed in some of the historic spaces so that Capitol tour guides like Ron and myself can give you almost kind of like a virtual tour of the Capitol. So here we are looking down at the rotunda.
This rotunda floor, it's about 7,200 square feet, and the angle is giving you a view of a painting. Now, it's called a frieze, and the style is trompe l'oeil. Yes, I don't speak French well. That's French to trick the eye. And then you see this sprawling painting called The Apotheosis of George Washington, painted by a naturalized citizen, Constantino Bermidi, from 1864 to 1865.
So if you can imagine this, folks, this is 180 feet above your head. From this angle, it's like you're standing on the floor of the rotunda, except we've got this X-ray vision where we can zoom in and really look at the fresco on the ceiling. Now, fresco means fresh in Italian, and it's painted on wet plaster. This is done actually in place.
Well, what we're zooming in on is Mercury. There are Roman, or you can use Greek, classical figures that all teach an American story. And friends, I want you to look at the bag of money Mercury is handing Robert Morris. Now look above Mr. Morris's silver hair, and in between the next gentleman's head, Janet, can you see a silhouette of another head?
Yes, and this is something that we can't point out on tour standing on the floor of the rotunda because you'd never be able to see it. So
I'm growing hair doing this.
This scene was actually dated 1865 by the artist Constantino Bermidi. The gentleman in the black suit, Robert Morris, the financier of the American Revolution. He was called richest in the Revolution. He personally bankrolled a lot of the shoes and weapons and uniforms for George Washington soldiers. And so he's depicted in this scene with Mercury. This is a scene about commerce. Right there between those two gentlemen, there was a third face. If you look between the guy in the black suit and the guy in the brown suit there was briefly painted the face of a gentleman named Montgomery Meigs. was a captain in the Army Corps of Engineers, and he essentially was in charge of the construction of the expansion of the Capitol dome. We've talked a couple of times about how there was an old wooden dome on the Capitol, and then it was pulled off and replaced with 9 million pounds of cast iron.
Just a guess, when Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated, Bermidi probably didn't paint that day. Just a guess.
Constantino Bermidi, you mentioned, he spent 11 months on the scaffolding working on this fresco on the ceiling of the rotunda. And based on the camera views that we have here on this wonderful live stream sponsored by the JSIC, the official hosts of today's inauguration, we can really zoom in and look at it. Again, this is called the Apotheosis of Washington. Washington is one of the stars, this painting, although there's a lot of people in it.
Yes, to the right of Mercury is Neptune, and he's with the transatlantic cable. As the artist is painting the apotheosis, they're physically constructing the transatlantic cable. By the rainbow is Minerva, representing science, talking to Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Morse, and Robert Fulton.
And if you can see at the top right at this point, we're going to rotate around so you guys can see these scenes around the edge. Coming to actually the bottom of your screen right now, you can see Neptune there with his trident, right? And wrapped around that scene with him, they're holding onto this thick black line, the transatlantic cable, which was being dragged across the bottom of the Atlantic while this fresco is being painted, while Bermidi, Constantino Bermidi, naturalized citizen, an Italian-American, an immigrant to this nation, painting this fresco on the ceiling of the rotunda.
Bellona, the Roman goddess of war,
well, first
armor,
we got
freedom.
Science right there at the bottom, crossing over the bottom, Science, and Minerva down there. If you all can see, there's a rainbow coming down.
Yes.
See that stripe coming toward the edge? Right where that rainbow comes down is another guy in a black suit there who we may recognize. And folks at home, if you don't recognize Benjamin Franklin when you see him, it's about to get a lot more obscure than that.
There's a statue of Benjamin Franklin here by Hiram Powers, sculpted in 1863. Please note that rainbow, you couldn't see it well in the 1950s and 60s because of such dirt and debris and
yes,
soot.
this painting was restored, and there's actually, if you look toward the center of the image, there's a ring of figures, and one edge of it is a little bit flattened. Right in the middle of that side, George Washington there with a pinkish lavender robe draped across his lap, and he's seated on a rainbow.
You know, all the figures that we see in the apotheosis are also depicted throughout the Capitol complex in some manner, on a wall, a medallion. What is in the rotunda is often re-emphasized throughout the building.
That's right. These artworks depict allegorical figures, people representing concepts like liberty and freedom, but they also represent real people. And so now we're looking at another fresco. This, again, is a painting on plaster, and this is called The Frieze of American History. This is a narrative wrapping around the rotunda.
Started by Constantino Bermidi.
Yeah.
In 1878. Now, we're at the area, you can see like a box or a desk and someone kneeling. That's about the general area in which he stopped. He had a little mishap.
Constantino Bermidi, our artist of the Capitol, was up here on the scaffolding painting this fresco around the rotunda, and it will be just kind of off to the right, actually. This fresco goes chronologically to the right. There we go. And so right here, this scene, there's kind of a box on the ground in it, right? This is a moment of transition. So what we got here is a moment where another artist takes over.
His name, Filippo Constantini. Now, friends, there's a person in the middle. It's like he's wearing knickers. For you golfers, as if he was Payne Stewart, bless his soul. And maybe you can see that the left shoe, or sandal, if you will, looks different than the right. If you can't, look at the three indigenous people. See, they're painted a little larger and what? A different color. That marks where the second artist takes charge, Filippo Constantini. And he paints scenes that Bermidi had etched, but things don't exactly go quite according to plan.
Yeah, this is something that, again, folks, if you were on tour with us in the rotunda, we would be squinting to try and see this. So it's incredible that we have a camera to bring in on this. That guy in the center with holding his cloak in front of him, that's William Penn. And our man Constantino Bermidi, our artist of the Capitol, is up there on that scaffolding, and he was working on William Penn's foot at the moment that he slipped from the scaffolding and started plummeting toward the floor of the rotunda. Bermidi was not hurt. He was rescued by a number of people who were around, including one of our predecessors in the Capitol Guide Service. He was brought back down to the ground and he declined to go back up that scaffolding. And that's when Congress brought in a second artist. So if you can see William Penn in the center, holding his cloak in front of him with one hand out to the side. One shoe has a buckle on William Penn and one doesn't.
As a matter of fact, the second artist, Filippo Costantini, actually wrote his name under the 3 Native Americans, but it's next to impossible to see. So we continue these scenes and we have, look at this, the colonization of New England.
So glad that Reverend Beeman referenced the fact that this Capitol is built on land, land of Native Americans, and they are pictured, Native Americans are pictured in some of the artworks in the Capitol, but they appear a lot in this particular fresco.
Here we have the colonial governor of Georgia, the first one, William Oglethorpe. That's the scene there, making a pact with the Muskogee Native Americans.
So this is a frieze. Now, typically the term frieze refers to a sculptural band around the top, similar to the pediments out on the east front that Ron and I were telling you about a little bit earlier. This one is painted around the inside of the rotunda, and as Ron mentioned, trompe l'oeil. It's to fool the eye. Oh, look, a little bit of sunlight shining in on that fresco right now. So it's flat. I just want to emphasize that in case you can't tell, flat, painted on plaster, shades of, I know it looks like black and white, but it's actually a deep, deep brown to create that 3D effect. Now, down on floor level, I wouldn't say human scale because they're still quite big, but down on floor level around the rotunda, we've also got a series of giant paintings.
Oh. This is by John Vanderlyn, and it's featuring Mr. Columbus. The painting size is 12 by 18. To give you an idea about why you should come and visit the Capitol, visit Congress.
That door right there is the east front door that we can see the light coming in there. That's that east front door we've been watching. Here it is from the outside.
We have paintings that are 20 by 30 if you visit Congress outside the chambers. It's, you know, we could be here until when? The next inauguration. Our beloved east front once again.
So there have been inaugurations in a lot of places. We've talked about this. We started off with George Washington's, originally in New York City. You mentioned that James Monroe was actually inaugurated the brick Capitol.
Yes, the brick
Capitol.
Capitol.
Building across the street. It's not there anymore, but where it was is the site of today's Supreme Court. Looking at the Capitol from the west now, you can see the inaugural platform down there in the center with the flags that built there on the west front. So some of what you're seeing, the upper edge is west front that's always there, an expansion of the Capitol in the 1890s, and the Frederick Law Olmsted landscape architect designed the Capitol grounds around it. But then we also have a little bit of extra, which is built every 4 years. When I want to say a little bit, this inaugural platform is massive. It takes 177 tons of sand to fill in the fountain underneath the west front so that they can build this platform up over it.
Now, Jenna, you mentioned platform and over it. At one point, there used to be a berm there, and Olmsted had it taken down, if you will, and they put in this terrace. Oh, look at the Senate side of the Capitol. We
have a great view here inside this. We're camera positioned in the Senate connecting corridor, looking at the doors to the Senate chamber there. Now, again, folks, this is a unique view, and actually, if you were on tour with Ron or I, we would be discouraging you from photographing those doors yourself. Those
Absolutely,
Senate doors.
I would.
The
yes,
United
of
States
course
Capitol
I
Police
would.
ask us not to have people point their personal cameras straight at those doors there to the Senate chamber. So this is a view that you're getting that no one else has, and we get on almost no other day.
That painting on the left is of Senator Robertson from Arkansas, and once again, our beautiful English Minton tiles.
Just around the corner, just out of sight, there's a painting of Hattie Caraway, also from Arkansas,
Yes.
the first woman elected to the Senate. There were women who served in Congress in the early years after their husbands who were members or senators passed away. There was a tradition known as the widow's mandate. But it wasn't until Hattie Caraway elected to the Senate in her own right.
We should mention, not far from Hattie Caraway, upstairs is a painting of Senator Margaret Chase Smith from the state of Maine.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about how some of these artworks are given to Congress from individuals or groups. Some of the statues we've seen and some more that we'll see given by various states, but there are also artworks that are commissioned. And here on the Senate side, like we're looking at here, there's a collection of art which depict some of these firsts.
Now, friends, we need to be specific about this. We've talked a lot about presidents, but the vice president is the president of the Senate, and there's a bust of every vice president of the Capitol, with the exception of one, Mr. Gore's, which is, from what I hear, it's coming. It's on the way.
Yeah, the vice presidential bust collection lines the Senate side of the building, and actually, as the years go by, there's more and more busts, and they appear in more and more places.
As a matter of fact, from this angle, not far, is Vice President Cheney's bust. It was dedicated in 2015. Ironically, it was dedicated in National Statuary Hall. What's National Statuary Hall? The old House Chamber. Because what? We like everything that is old.
You can see folks with cameras getting into position there. Oh, and we're back on the East Front Plaza here. Now again, underneath that plaza there where you see the folks standing and the cars parked, underneath there, the Capitol Visitor Center, the newest part of the Capitol complex, opened up in 2008. And that's where most folks come through when they come to visit us.
Hope we're able to, I'm glad we're able to showcase that the inauguration is more than just the oath of office. It's a day's event. It's prior to January 20th.
It's a full day of events. I mean, there are ceremonies on top of ceremonies. The inaugural address isn't a requirement, but it's a tradition.
Right.
We may someday see a person who declines the opportunity to address. But I was saying earlier that the ceremony almost is how you can track the evolution of technology in our nation, because some of our early presidents, the remarks were quite short. George Washington's very, very short, because there was no television or radio to broadcast it out to the people. It would be printed in the papers.
Can you imagine President Lincoln on the East Front? He's got his table in front. There's all types of soldiers around. And I mean, what, maybe 100 yards you could hear? Maybe.
And we've seen this year a much less crowded event than this traditionally is, and we've been talking about how when the inaugural ceremonies made the move from outside to inside, from inside to outside, back President Monroe, how many more people came to attend, how many folks would come to watch. So here we are waiting outside of the president's room. It's a little room on the Senate side of the building, and here we go. We got the president and vice president stepping in toward pause for applause. Here they are in the president's room. Now this, I will say, is also a tricky room to photograph, folks, because of those huge mirrors on either side. It is not a big space at all.
Saw the fireplace there. I'm such a nerd. I think I know how many fireplaces are in the Capitol. So that's going to be a quiz for you right now, Janet.
Trivia question for me. Ron is asking how many fireplaces
I'm
are in
going to
the
give you three
Capitol.
choices.
Okay.
Okay, 120, 160, 144.
160.
144. Now, how many work, that's another issue.
All right, here comes the signing, folks.
Before we begin, Mr. President, after you're done signing the documents, when you're ready for the ceremony to end, if you could just give me a signal nod, I'll have press escorted out of the room. Once the press are on the stairs secured, we'll go ahead and be ready to move on to the Ohio clock corridor. Excuse me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready for the signing.
So we can see President Biden here preparing sign in the president's room. A small room on the Senate side of the Capitol. We have very exclusive access to see this today, the way that we're seeing this. There'll be some parts that we don't get to see, but they're being filmed for archival purposes, for posterity.
Again, I want to go back. The reason why we have the president's room, George Washington. He said the president should have a room where from time to time he can meet with Congress and sign bills, or not sign bills, but have interaction.
Yeah, and it's another holdover from a different era, folks, when the term of our president and our Congress overlapped differently. So we tend to think of inaugurations happen in January, new Congress comes in January 3rd, right? But that's been different over the years.
Oh, let's watch.
Well done. Well done, my very faithful sir. And just pardon you. What's your first name? I need all the help I could get, Mr. President, for treating my brother short.
All right. Good. Packages are ready to be on.
So if you don't recognize them, folks, members of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies gathered there. The JSIC gathered with President Biden and Vice President Harris in the President's Room, the space that we're seeing here.
Friends, when they leave this room, they're going towards the Ohio clock. Now, the Ohio clock has quite a bit. Friends, when the President and Vice President leaves this room, they're going towards the Ohio clock. Now, the Ohio clock has...
Why is it called the Ohio clock?
Well, it's interesting. A senator from Connecticut, Senator David Daggett, asked a clockmaker from Philadelphia, Thomas Voigt, to complete it. He does in 1816, but Ohio came to the Union in 1803. I don't quite get it.
It's a mystery, and no one knows the answer. This clock has come to be known as the Ohio clock. It stands in the Senate hallway, which we're going to be seeing the party passing through soon on their way to the rotunda for the presentation of gifts. We're just wrapping up the signing ceremony here. And so we're on the Senate side of the building in these hallways, which are beautifully decorated. Again, if we can call your attention to the floor for just a second.
Oh.
Minton tiles, they're an encaustic tile, which means that the way that they're glazed is a little bit different than the kind of tile we're used to in our kitchens and baths. They're made in Stoke-upon-Trent, England. They're custom made for the Capitol, hallways lined with these.
Friends, don't just think that the members can walk on these aisles. You can. How? Visit Congress. Janet, I think the number one question that's asked of us, how do I visit Congress? If not the question within the top three. And depending on what part of the building you're in, you will likely walk on these tiles. They're not something that's just sacred for the members. No, to the contrary.
That's a great point. The one place you'll see the Minton tiles like that is on the first floor on the Senate half of the building, yes, which we won't be seeing on our cameras today, but we can normally take folks there on tour. The hallways were decorated by Constantino Brumidi, the artist who painted the frescoes inside the Capitol that we were looking at a little bit earlier.
I'm not done with this Ohio clock. So, ladies and gentlemen, there was a person known as the man with the green hat. Yes, during Prohibition, he used to sell alcohol in the House office buildings. It was known he had an office. He was exposed, and he moves to the Senate side. and legend has it, in the Ohio clock, spirits might have been kept in that clock, and members had access to it.
I mean, the period where alcohol sale, manufacture, distribution, except for medicinal purposes. The period when that was illegal in the United States was an interesting one here on Capitol Hill. And there are rumors actually all over of hidden compartments and various places where things must have been hidden. And they create this kind of mythology around this. And I gotta say, there are plenty of mysteries. We don't know why the Ohio clock is called the Ohio clock, but there are plenty of tales of this secret compartment is where, you know, they hid the contraband during the Prohibition period. But I think a lot of them more likely are just quirks of the architecture, because as we've discussed, this is a building that's been built in so many different pieces, and each piece added on to the next, right? And every space enduring these constant changes in what the space is being used for over the years. And what's interesting about this room, the president's room, is it really only has this purpose.
Yes.
What we're seeing happening in here today, this is essentially, and it's a very small space. I want to emphasize that, folks, because space is at a premium inside the Capitol, and there is no such thing as wasted space or empty offices. No. But this particular space is set aside for this special purpose of the president using it on Inauguration Day. And again, this dates to a time when our president's term and our Congress's terms would be running out March 3rd or 4th, and there would be kind of a race to sign last-minute legislation in that beautiful president's room. Looking down at the rotunda here.
By the way, I think it's possible President Biden may not re-enter the president's room until either a State of the Union or, well, who knows in the future, but I wouldn't think he would be there maybe one or two more times.
It doesn't get used a lot. That's what we're saying. And for us to be able to see this moment of President Biden and VP Harris in the president's room, they've just concluded the signing ceremony. Also stored in this room are some gifts Congress received. There are some ceremonial gifts, particularly from other nations. So we're looking down at the rotunda because what's happening here is people are starting to gather. The spouses of the dignitaries that we were just seeing in the signing room starting to gather in this space for the presentation of gifts, which is going to be happening soon. Typically occurs actually during the inaugural luncheon. This year, because things are a little bit different than past years, there is no inaugural luncheon, and so this is being sort of modified for happening in the rotunda.
It's a 96-foot diameter, 108 windows in the rotunda. And can we tell in the center the discoloration? If you're thinking, was there a hole there? Yes, it was covered up. So the idea, the painting of George Washington glorified, you will look down through the hole or oculus to a statue of George Washington in the crypt, and then he would be with Mrs. Washington interred or reinterred, except much of that didn't happen.
Right, that was a part of the design that didn't end up happening, but right there in the center of the rotunda where we see some camera equipment and things now, there was intended to be this statue of George Washington, and actually you can see the statue that was meant to go there. If you visit our friends at the Smithsonian American History Museum, they've got a Horatio Greenough statue of George Washington, an unusual view of Washington. We are not used to seeing him seated, wearing a classical Greco-Roman toga and sandals.
No, we're not.
And that was meant to sit right there in the middle of the rotunda. Now, there are some sculptures around the edge of the room. One of the oldest in this space is actually a statue of Thomas Jefferson, which Congress received as a gift.
1833.
And it sort of was the moment when they started to realize they could commission sculptures. There was a lot of thought put into the architecture of the Capitol and the artworks that are adhered to it, especially after the fire in the War of 1812 when we were concerned about fireproofing everything. And so paintings, sculpture are a little bit easier to be vandalized. And so there was an early emphasis away from them and onto things like frescoes and friezes that we've seen.
Now, the Ohio clock is on the right-hand side. They're coming past that area and other leadership offices.
So again, this is a view of the exterior of the Senate chamber, doors there. This Ohio clock we were talking about, it's one of the iconic artifacts inside the Capitol, iconic timepieces. It would be just out of view on your right-hand side, where you see those three folks there kind of in dark suits. Now, just out of view on your left-hand side, portrait of the first woman in the Senate, Hattie Caraway, and that's also obviously where we anticipate seeing the president and vice president emerge in a few seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to picture this. In the old chamber, Vice Senator Breckinridge said, let's pick up our desk and move them into the new chamber. That's how they moved there.
Yeah, so this is the door to the new Senate chamber.
Yes.
And again, when Ron and I talk old and new, we're talking the difference between about 1810 and about 1859. So new would be 1859. And so in there, behind those wooden doors, is where the Senate currently meets, using desks that came from their original chamber.
You know, I wish I'll do it. So, Senate visitation and House visitation. Oh, do you have to be a certain age to visit the Senate?
So I will say that the House and Senate sessions are always open to the public. Yes, anybody can come and watch. You can get a pass from your member, your representative, or your senator, and sit in and watch in the galleries. But there are certain rules in the galleries about photography and applause and things like that. And Ron is alluding to...
You better be 6 years of age and older to visit the Senate. There's such a place called the Children's Room, where my colleagues have put me in timeout many a time there. And it's not far from that camera angle just gave you. Oh, what a view here. We see elements of all four branches, if I'm not mistaken, for review. And again, I mentioned this earlier. I had served in the 82nd Airborne Division for quite some time. And here they're coming out.
Here they go.
They'll be passing by Leader McConnell's office.
I thought it was a Marriott.
Now, once again, folks, you see the Capitol Police Officer in uniform. The gentleman in the brown coat is United States Capitol Police Officer Eugene O. Goodman, who is serving as the acting Deputy Senate Sergeant at Arms for the day. Speaker Pelosi just went by there.
I didn't notice her without.
Cream-colored dress. She took off the turquoise coat we saw her in earlier. Senator Schumer and Blunt going by us there. And so as they've passed us now in this corridor, they're about to pass by McConnell's office.
Look, Janet, notice the floors have changed.
Fabulous view here of what's called the small Senate rotunda. So just off the rotunda, a small area there with the columns. It's actually an air shaft. If you were to look over that railing, you'd see down to the first floor of the Capitol, and it used to distribute light and air in the days before air conditioning and light bulbs and all the stuff that we have now.
Goes the House Sergeant of Arms, Senate Sergeant of Arms.
And our acting Deputy Senate Sergeant at Arms there in the light brown coat, that's Eugene Goodman, U.S. Capitol Police Officer. Folks, you may have seen some photos and video of him recently.
I mentioned the floors. Those are mosaics, which if you visit the Library of Congress, you'll see in abundance. It's the only area that we have mosaics in the Capitol. Look how President Jackson is dominating that room right now. Look at that posture on the right-hand side.
So these statues, again, are from the National Statuary Hall collection. Every state gets to send two. There's VP Harris and Doug Emhoff, her husband, heading into the rotunda. And Dr. Jill Biden and President Biden heading into the rotunda. Surrounded by a phalanx here, including other dignitaries, as we discussed, sergeants at arms.
And remember, this is a scaled back.
Yes, this is a
scaled back operation.
Remember, this is fewer people than we would normally see at inauguration. So another incredible feature of this broadcast is that we have clear views of these folks that aren't too crowded. This is incredible.
I'm blown away.
As we look down in this direction, that's the door of the Senate at the very end of the hall, that wooden door with the rounded top that you see on it there. And again, if you were on tour with us, I would be asking you to please not point your camera at that door, because the United States Capitol Police like to keep that area secure. You can see some Capitol Police officers here flanking this north door into the rotunda. So the president entering the rotunda now.
Oh, look at that beautiful
All right.
painting.
Now, this is a painting selected by the chair of the JSIC.
And the First Lady and the Vice President and the second gentleman. Normally at this time, we have a lunch, and probably no person alive has attended more of those lunches than President Biden has. It's an important moment where it's bipartisan. It's the time to bond between the executive and the legislative branch of the government. We probably don't need as much bonding because we already have that natural bonding with you and the traditions here. By those traditions, usually there's a painting at the front of that event that the chairman picks. This time, not knowing we were going to have an event until what we were going to do about an event until late, I asked Dr. Biden to help pick the painting, and this is the one that she recommended. The painting is Landscape with Rainbow. Rainbow, always a good sign. It's loaned to us for today from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. The artist, Dr. Robert Sheldon Duncanson, he was the best-known African-American painter in the years surrounding the Civil War. He was based in Cincinnati, encouraged by abolitionists who, among other things, sponsored a trip for him to do some study in Europe. This is a painting that he painted in 1859, and I think maybe it's sort of the classic America as a paradise painting that a lot of painters were doing then. But for him, a black artist painting this painting that's so much like an American utopia on the verge of a war that we would fight over slavery, makes all of that, I think, even more interesting in that while he faced lots of challenges, obviously was optimistic even in 1859 about America. And so, Dr. Biden, thanks for helping select this painting, and glad to have all four of you here as we move on to my good friend Senator Klobuchar.
I like the rainbow.
The rainbow is always a good sign. Let's hope so. Go right ahead.
A mixed-race artist who created this painting, and it actually depicts essentially one of the last stop on the Underground Railroad.
Door number 2.
Moment on the river.
There we are. Good. Mr. President, First Lady, Madam Vice President, and our very first second gentleman, on behalf of the American people, it is our honor to present these custom-made crystal vases commemorating your historic inauguration. Lennox, which you know is a great company, American company, has handcrafted these gifts for the past 9 presidential inaugurations. It is a good thing I don't have to hand them to you personally. They each weigh, with the base, 32 pounds, but combined 64. But Jill, I know, is very strong and could take them both. Exactly. But the Lennox company is actually based in Bristol, Pennsylvania, which you know, Mr. President, is a mere 132 miles from Scranton, since we know today all roads lead to Scranton. The team at Lennox has worked for months to capture the spirit of this inauguration and your incoming administration. Mr. President, your vase features the White House, and Vice President Harris's features the U.S. Capitol. The gifts represent the hope and the faith the American people have placed in you to move our country forward. Thank you. Thank you.
As Senator Klobuchar mentioned, the Lennox Company is an American company. It's been around since 1889. President Wilson commissioned China for the White House from them, first set of American-made White House china in 1918. Those lead crystal vases, 17 inches tall, she mentioned they weigh 32 pounds. They're all handmade in Pennsylvania by a craftsman named Peter O'Rourke.
Well, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, while the pandemic has sadly limited our usual hospitality, as others have mentioned, I'm very glad we still carry on some of our favorite inaugural traditions. It's my honor and privilege to help present these flags of our nation that were flown over today's event here at the Capitol. Now, I have to make one point of personal privilege on behalf of the Senate. With all due respect to our distinguished Speaker and our colleagues from the House, I have to note, not only did we just swear in a son and daughter of the Senate to these high offices, but indeed both these former senators skipped the House altogether. The Star-Spangled Banner is our greatest symbol of our endurance of the American idea. It flies over this building on triumphant days and on tragic ones, over all factions and all parties. And today this flag flew over our former colleague's inauguration as the very first female Vice President of the United States, So to our very distinguished former colleague, Madam Vice President, please accept this flag with the highest compliments and congratulations of the United States Senate.
Senator McConnell here presenting flags that have flown over the Capitol today during the 59th inaugural ceremonies. Speaker Pelosi, let's
The
listen.
distinguished leader of the Senate pointed out that he has hosted this lunch for members of the Senate who have become president and vice president. But I have the privilege of giving the flag to the President of the United States, the flag that was flown when you were sworn in, Mr. President. This flag may it reflect all that is said about your inauguration. America united. May it be a symbol of the hope, the healing, and the just all of the enthusiasm that you have for our country. And as we heard the beautiful national anthem, when we're at the stadium and they say, is our flag still there? Then you say, play ball, right there, play ball. So we're going to get ready to play ball. We're ready to go with the inspiration of our flag flying. But again, on behalf of the House of Representatives, it is my privilege to extend to you the flag that was flown the early moment that you were sworn in as President of the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. Biden. Thank you. If we had the lunch, we would have had California wine. Is that not right? Madam Vice President?
That is correct.
Mr. Emhoff, congratulations. With liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
These gifts are presented by the JSEC on the behalf of the American people. We've just seen flags presented that were flown over the Capitol today. And the next gift actually will be photo portraits of the President and Vice President at the moment of their swearing in. And those photos had to be snapped.
Oh, so quickly.
Printed.
Escorted over.
Yeah, it was a real sprint. They have the mats all ready to go, and they just need to snap the photo in the moment and then get them printed and put the frames together.
Right? It's a good picture, too.
The Honorable
President
Kevin
Biden,
McCarthy.
Vice President Harris, Dr. Biden, and Mr. Imhoff, on behalf of the Republicans in Congress, congratulations. Very proud of you both. When President Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States, only a handful of people saw the ceremony or heard the famous first inaugural address. Today, the inauguration is seen around the nation and indeed around the world. Yet the task facing the nation is no less momentous than it was in Washington's time. I listened to your speech today. You talked among the tension and division. Our task as leaders is to bind this nation's wounds and dedicate ourselves to the values of all Americans share together. With modern technology, just a few minutes ago, it captured in these pictures. History in the making, for all the world to see. This picture should serve as a reminder of that task that we have before us. As a very proud son of California, it is my honor to present to a very proud daughter of California as well. Today, Vice President Harris made history, and all of America should celebrate that. But we should also remember that this is not the end, but just the beginning. As leaders, we are judged not by our words, but by our actions. So let's go forth from here together, accomplish great things for the American people. And every time you look at this photo, remember the beginning of the job we have to do. Congratulations.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Imhoff, Dr. Biden, Mr. President. No, Joe, you're Mr. President. And we are so proud of that. Dr. Biden, he makes you call him Mr. President? Marriage is about to get rocky, I can tell. On behalf of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inaugural Ceremonies, I too am proud. More than that, I'm ecstatic to present the two of you this picture. A testament to technology and a testament to history. Mr. President, in your speech, you talked about faith. You talked about tribulations, but you talked about victory. The Johnson brothers wrote a great hymn. You know it well, Mr. President. Today, we have a new day. And that hymn came out of faith and out of deep trouble into hope. And they said, facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march